Howdy folks, and welcome to RandomJank. Now every once in a while I take a look back at some of our older videos just to kind of see how far we've come along since the last time that we did stuff. And then I took a look at the really old stuff, like the first set of videos that we did, specifically the pre-release one. It looks pretty bad. So today we're going to go back to that and do pre-release 2. So my first major rule is keep your deck at 40. The worst thing that you can do is just load up your deck with all the cool looking spells that you've got and make your deck bigger than it actually has to be. If you're only at 40, maybe even 41 depending on if you really want that extra land or that one extra spell, 40 is the way that you want to stay because you have the better chance of getting the card that you need it when you need it. If you've got like 45 or 46, you have a lot more cards to get through to the stuff that you want to cast when you want to cast it. Alright, so staying with the numbers theme, try to keep it at 17-ish lands. You want to be able to cast your spells when you get them, and you want to have consistency in when you can actually make your land drops. In a format like Sealed or like any pre-release, if you're missing your lands, you're turning yourself back a couple of turns, and it's a horrible thing to do, because it's already a fast enough format that you lose one turn, that's the one turn that your opponent's going to need to eliminate you instead. And you don't want to lose, you want to win. Now, most games in Limited are won on the ground, on the battlefield. You don't necessarily have access to everything that you want when you want it. Especially if you've been seeing the set and you know there's a lot of powerful stuff. You're pretty much just stuck with creatures. So, load up your deck with predominantly creature stuff. You want to be able to swing and attack your opponent whenever you have the opportunity to, whenever it's beneficial to you. If you don't load up your deck with creatures and you just load it up with spells, you better have a damn good reason for it. Like if you have that one spell that makes all your other spells deal like triple damage or something. Basically a card that doesn't exist yet. For the moment, try to leave it with as many creatures as possible. When you're building your deck, you're going to be seeing a lot of cards potentially for the first time. One of the best things that I can ever give advice for anything is look at the Wizards site, because as a new set is going to be coming out, they do a lot of previews for those cards, they do a lot of explanation on what that card can do, and maybe even some other interactions with cards that are also in the set. If you take a look at the site, you'll actually know what some of those cards are, so when you're opening up your packs and you're making your deck, you're not going to be completely lost. You're going to know what most of those things do, and you can just spend your time having fun at the pre-release rather than just calling over a judge every time you don't know what a card does. Now, of course, when you're opening up 6 packs, you're going to have just this massive pile of cards in front of you, and you might not always have a direction for where you want to go. Another good thing to try to think about is keep your decks at 2 colors. Now, Return to Ravnica was kind of an exception because everything was a 2-color deck, or 2-color set, mind you, and you could really mix and match those colors and make like 3 or even 4 sometimes because there was a lot of things to help you have mana extra. Most sets don't have that benefit, and if you leave yourself at 2, you'll have the opportunity to be creative in a sense that you have more options without straining yourself too thin by trying to include every single color. Now, if you happen to open up a card like Door to Nothingness, it's not necessarily a card that you want to use at a pre-release because then you're stuck using all 5, which gives you a lot of variety, but not a lot of consistency. Now, one way that pre-releases differ from normal deck building is that you don't have a choice in what cards you get. It's all just the stuff that you open up at the time. Which means that there are going to be a lot of choices that you make that when you make a normal deck, you're not necessarily going to make for yourself. Case in point, the vanilla test. Now, the vanilla test is something that was invented a long time ago when the set was still brand new, when Magic itself was still brand new, and it's just used to see whether or not a creature is actually average at best. Case in point, let's take a look at Grizzly Bears. Now, Grizzly Bears is just a normal creature. It's a 2/2 for 2. That's exactly what the vanilla test is. If a creature can actually match its casting cost with its power and toughness, it's usually not that bad. It's not something that you would want to toss into every deck that you've got, but if you have a few extra slots and you need to fill it up with creatures, and creatures are one of the most important things to put into a pre-release deck, make sure to try and follow the vanilla test. It's one of those things that helps you fill out your deck and have a lot of defenses so that you have time to cast the things that you need to destroy your opponent. So I'm going to tell a quick little story about just one of the little instances that happened where unconventional worked for me. It was at a time when the Magic Game Day had happened. It was the Magic Celebration, really. We were getting free boosters, and in a tournament setting, if you beat your opponent, you got an extra booster on top of it to make your deck a little bit better. Now, in my deck, I had a card called Reckless Brute. It was a 3/1 for 3, Had haste, but it had to attack every single turn. Now, I had won a couple of rounds, and one of the guys that I had beat was a little disappointed that I had won. He decided to look through my stuff and my sideboard, the stuff that I didn't actually have in my deck, to see basically how I won. I think he was a little surprised that I did it. My win-loss record is not that great over there. Now, in its place, he would have chosen to put a card called Servant of Nephirox. It's the same casting cost, except it's a black instead of a red, and instead of having haste and having to attack every turn, the card had Exalted. Now, Exalted is a mechanic where if you're only attacking with one creature, it buffs up that creature, and if you have a lot of Exalted cards out, it buffs up that creature by quite a bit. Would have been really good, except that wasn't part of my plan. My plan of attack was to swing with pretty much everything that I've got every single turn, so I can weaken my opponent as much as possible, and then cast like a volcanic geyser to completely eliminate him if I had the chance. Now, the reason why I kept Reckless Brute in the deck rather than tossing in the Exalted creature is it put all the decision making on my opponent. He now had to decide what was more valuable to him. Maybe it was the removal spell that was in his hand. He didn't want to spend it on another creature, he wanted to spend it on that. Maybe he didn't mind losing 3 life every single turn. Maybe one of the creatures on his board he didn't need anymore. The downside with Reckless Brute was the fact that it only had 1 toughness. The fact that it had 3 power, on the other hand, in a core set, wasn't a lot of things more tough than that. So almost 100% of the time, I knew I was at least going to be eliminating one of my opponent's creatures with this creature on the board. And if I didn't, he's taking 3 damage every single turn. Or he's wasting one of his spells on that creature. No matter what, I got value out of that creature. And most of the time, because it was such a small little creature that came out in the middle of the game when everybody else is trying to build up their own side of things, it was pretty much well ignored. I didn't have to worry about that creature at all, I knew what it was doing, and my opponent then had to make a bunch of extra steps to wonder what else was going to be coming out. At the time it was nothing, just in case you were wondering. And finally, even though you make your 40 card deck at the beginning of the pre-release, don't forget that you can change it up whenever you want. As long as it's in between rounds, you can change your deck whenever you want. If you see another card that can work a lot better, if you see a card that's situational, case in point, let's say you have a card like Naturalize. You don't know if your opponent has an artifact or an enchantment that you want to get rid of, but it's in your sideboard and you're playing green. Well, suddenly he's playing a bunch of enchantments that you can't stop. You can then put in Naturalize to actually have a defense against it. A lot of beginner players forget about the sideboard. I did it myself as well. Whenever F&M was rolling around, I just had my 60 card deck. I did not have my sideboard with it. At pre-releases, you can sub in whatever cards that you're not actually using in your basic deck, just to help out and try to punch through with that last little bit of damage, or to stop something that you didn't really know that your opponent was going to be running. So that's all I have for this week. How about you guys? Let me know any kind of cool pre-release stories that you have, or if there was a cool situation that happened where you guys were using unconventional cards that nobody thought that they would ever see. I will be back next week with another video. I'll see you then.
Howdy folks, Dan Aubuchon here, the other guy down in the credits. It's my sad duty to inform you that this will be the last episode of RandomJank that Chris and I do. It just hasn't gotten to the point where we wanted it to be, and it's taking up a lot of time. We have a ton of other projects that, well, personally that I'm working on editing-wise. There's a mountain of stuff I'm trying to get rid of, and Chris wants to take a bit of a break too. He'd like to refresh and try something new, something to do with a bit more of a broader appeal, since RandomJank is a pretty niche kind of show that we were putting together. So this will be the last of it, but not the last of us, and we hope to see you in the future. Have a good one.